At my grad party, my stepmom mocked my mom's mental illness in her toast while my dad just sat there. Then I found out they'd been stealing Gov aid in my name for years. I lost my family, but gained something they never expected. When the FBI called them, and you know those moments where everything inside you freezes, but you have to smile because people are watching. That was me at my own college graduation party, standing in front of a rented hall in Scranton, Pennsylvania, holding a plastic flute of cheap champagne while my stepmother, Tricia, clinked her glass and said, "Let's all raise a glass to Emily. She made it despite her mother's mental illness. Honestly, it's a miracle she's even here." Laughter, actual laughter. Everyone looked at her, then at me, waiting for me to say something. My face burned. I laughed too, because what else could I do? My father stood next to her, hand on her waist, proud and silent. My mother had died when I was 14. Yes, she had struggled with depression. But to call her out like that night in front of family, old teachers, my friends, it was like being publicly stripped of dignity. Later, I slipped into the backyard to get some air. That's when my Uncle Ray came over, a man who barely said more than 10 words at family events. He pressed a folded $50 bill into my palm and said, "Use this before they take even that." I laughed awkwardly. "What do you mean?" He just looked at me, long, tired eyes, and said, "Ask your father about the checks." Then he walked away. The phrase, "the checks," stuck in my head all night. I didn't understand it. I didn't even try to, not until 2 weeks later when I moved into my new apartment and tried to apply for student loan forgiveness. The application bounced back with a notice. Existing federal aid associated with your social security number. Ongoing benefits disbursement. I froze. Benefits? I wasn't on any government aid. I hadn't been since I was a kid. I called the number on the notice, assuming it was a mistake. But it wasn't. According to federal records, I had been receiving supplemental security income for severe developmental delay since I was 16. Payments had gone directly to my father's address. 4 years. 4 years of monthly payments under my name. 4 years of forged documents, fake medical reports, my father's signature next to mine. And every time I'd been short on money, every time I'd skipped meals in college, every time I'd asked for help and been told, "Money's tight right now," they'd been cashing government checks meant for me. I remember sitting on my apartment floor, staring at the screen, shaking so hard I couldn't type. I called my dad. He didn't pick up. Trisha texted me instead, "Your father is stressed. Don't make things worse. We'll talk later." That night I didn't sleep. I just kept rereading the words "severe developmental delay." The insult of it, the audacity. By morning, I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't letting it go. So I filed a fraud report. Full name, full documentation. Every form, every piece of proof. 2 weeks later, the FBI called them. And that was the moment everything, my family, my safety, my past, cracked wide open. I grew up in Clark's Summit, just outside Scranton. My dad, Greg, was a mechanic who worked long hours, and my mom, Teresa, stayed home with me. She wasn't crazy, like Trisha loved to whisper at family gatherings. She was quiet, gentle, and sometimes sad. She used to hum when she cooked old Fleetwood Mac songs mostly, and she'd hug me like I was her anchor. After she died, things changed fast. Dad remarried within a year. Trisha moved into our house like she'd been waiting for it. She threw away my mom's things, called them junk from a broken woman. I was 15. I remember standing in the doorway while she tossed a box of my mom's journals into a trash bag and saying, "You'll thank me later, honey. It's better to start clean." I didn't thank her. Trisha was the kind of woman who smiled while she cut you down. She'd compliment my clothes, then say, "Your mom used to dress like that before she let herself go." At dinner, she'd talk about mental illness running in families, like it was a joke. Dad just faded. He started parroting her words, nodding along when she said I was too emotional. By the time I graduated high school, I was basically invisible in my own house. I worked 2 part-time jobs and spent every dollar I earned on gas, books, and my mom's old car, a dented blue Civic I refused to let them sell. When I got accepted to Penn State, I thought maybe things would change. Dad hugged me. Trisha said, "Don't expect help with money, we're barely keeping the lights on." So I worked all through college. Cafeteria shifts, tutoring, cleaning offices at night. I lived on ramen and caffeine and pride. Every few months, Dad would call to brag about some financial miracle that got them through tough times. I didn't think much of it. He'd say, "We're managing, kiddo, don't worry about us." I thought he was just being a dad. Turns out I was the miracle. When Uncle Ray gave me that $50, I thought he was just being kind. But now I know he'd been watching for years. He'd seen them take those checks, he just didn't have proof. I guess he hoped I'd figure it out on my own. When the FBI call happened, I wasn't there. But my cousin, who works at the same strip mall as Trisha, told me she saw them being questioned in the parking lot by two men in suits. Trisha was shaking. My dad looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. The next day, my phone blew up texts, calls, voicemails, not apologies, threats. "Why would you do this to your family? Do you want to destroy your father? After everything we've done for you?" They wanted me to drop the case. To fix it, they said I was overreacting. But then my cousin sent me a photo she'd found in one of Trisha's old Facebook albums, a picture of me at 16, standing in front of our mailbox. The caption read, "Our special girls' benefits finally came through. Praise God." And that's when I realized this wasn't some quick scam. They'd built a whole life around my supposed disability. After the FBI call, my world went silent. No one in my family spoke to me directly, they spoke around me. Through cousins, through Facebook posts, through whispered gossip in our small town. Every word twisted like a knife. Emily turned her own father in. She's always been dramatic. She's trying to get attention. Meanwhile, I was getting letters, official ones. The investigators wanted statements, forms, copies of my ID. They were polite but serious. The man handling my case, Agent Morris, explained that the fraud had gone on much longer than 4 years. He said they were digging through records that dated back to when I was 13. Apparently, the first application for disability under my name was submitted right after my mom died. Let that sink in. The same month we buried her, my father had filed paperwork claiming I was mentally unfit, citing trauma-induced cognitive impairment. He'd even attached a forged letter from a psychiatrist, a doctor who, as it turned out, didn't exist. When Morris told me that, I went numb. I couldn't even cry. I just sat there staring at my laptop, hearing Trisha's voice in my head saying, "Your mom was sick, you might be too." They'd been setting me up since I was a child. And all those years when I tried to talk about feeling ignored, about wanting therapy, about how off things felt, they told me I was being dramatic. Now I understood why. They couldn't risk me seeing a real doctor. Within a month, my father and Trisha were formally charged with government fraud, identity theft, and falsification of medical records. The charges hit our town like a grenade. My father's auto shop closed within a week. Trisha deleted all her social media. I thought it would feel good. It didn't, because even as the truth came out, the blame came back to me. My aunt said I'd ruined a man's life over some money. My grandmother refused to talk to me at all. Uncle Ray was the only one who said, "You did the right thing, kid. They were stealing from you, not feeding you." But I couldn't shake the guilt. My dad had raised me. He'd taught me how to ride a bike, how to change a tire, how to make spaghetti when we couldn't afford takeout. He'd also stolen my future and called it love. Then, out of nowhere, he called. I almost didn't answer, but something in me needed to hear his voice. He sounded tired, broken, or pretending to be. He said, "Emily, you don't understand what Trisha and I did. It wasn't what it looks like. Please don't talk to anyone else about this. You'll regret it." When I asked him why he'd lied for years, he said something that still chills me. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. She said it was temporary. She said we'd fix it when we could. I swear to God, I didn't know how deep she went." That's when it hit me, he was trying to pin it all on her. But later that week, when I met with Agent Morris again, he showed me copies of the paperwork. And right there in blue ink was my dad's handwriting. Every line, every signature, every date. This wasn't just Trisha's doing. My father had been in on it from the beginning. And the real reason he'd done it? That wouldn't come out until the second investigation, the one that started when they found where the money actually went. A month after the first set of charges, I got a call from Agent Morris again. He said, "Emily, we've uncovered something new. You need to come in." His voice wasn't calm like before. It was clipped, careful. I took the day off work and drove down to the field office in Wilkes-Barre. The whole ride there, my stomach felt like it was trying to crawl up my throat. I kept replaying every conversation I'd ever had with my dad, every lie I'd ignored, because I wanted to believe he was still the man who once carried me on his shoulders. When I got there, Morris had a folder waiting for me. He didn't hand it over right away. He just said, "We traced where the aid money went. I think you should see this yourself." Inside the folder were bank statements, hundreds of pages. I saw my name printed at the top of each account. And then I saw the transfers from my account to an LLC I'd never heard of, TRG Home Care Services. At first, I didn't understand. Then Morris slid over a printout of the company's registration. Owner, Gregory L. Barnes, my dad. My father had been running a business, a home care company, and using me as a funding source. Every month, he and Tricia had reported care hours for a disabled dependent, me, and used that to justify the SSI payments. They'd built their business around that lie. But it got worse, much worse. TRG Home Care Services had other clients, too. People from our town, elderly, disabled, struggling families. Morris said there were irregularities in those records, too. Fake hours, double billing, even false client reports. My father hadn't just stolen from me. He'd built an empire on fraud. The company had pulled in over $400,000 in government aid over 7 years. I couldn't breathe. I remember staring at the papers and whispering, "That can't be right. My dad doesn't even own a computer." Morris gave me a look that told me everything. "Your stepmother does." It was Tricia's handwriting on the invoices. Her name on the spreadsheets. But every check was signed by my dad. They'd been in it together, equal parts greed and guilt. I thought back to every time they'd told me we couldn't afford things. My first semester when I'd begged for help buying books and my dad said, "Money's tight, Em." The time Tricia made me feel guilty for asking for rent money. Every single time they'd made me feel like a burden while using my name to bankroll their life. I asked Morris, "So what happens now?" He said quietly, "Now we open a second case. Financial exploitation, elder fraud, and conspiracy. It's not just identity theft anymore." And that was the moment I realized I wasn't just the victim of their scam. I was the centerpiece. I was the reason the whole thing had worked. Without my condition, the fake company would have looked suspicious years ago. But they'd painted me as the dependent daughter who needed around-the-clock care, and that had given them legitimacy. They hadn't just stolen my name. They'd built their world around destroying who I was. That night, I went home and pulled out the only photo I had left of my mom, her sitting on the porch, smiling like she'd finally found peace. I whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm going to finish what you couldn't." Because I knew then, this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about exposure. About taking every mask they'd ever worn and ripping it off in daylight. But first, I had to make them believe I was done fighting. After the second investigation opened, I went quiet. Dead quiet. I stopped answering Agent Morris's calls, stopped responding to my cousin's baiting texts, stopped posting anything online. I wanted my dad and Tricia to think I'd burned out, that I was ashamed, beaten down, backing off. Because people like them only relax when they think they've won. And when they relax, that's when they slip. I still lived in the small one-bedroom near campus, working nights at a diner. It wasn't much, but it gave me space to think. I built a plan slowly, like layering glass, one fragile move at a time. Step 1 was information. I went through everything I still had from home, old tax records, insurance forms, school paperwork. I found copies of my medical history Tricia had helped me organize when I applied to college. At the bottom of one folder was a document I'd never noticed before, a guardianship consent form from 2012, signed with my name. I'd been 14. It said my father had been granted legal guardianship over my mental health disabled dependent status. I stared at it for an hour. The signature was mine, but it wasn't my handwriting. That was the key. That was what tied every part of the scam together. That fake guardianship gave them legal control to file aid claims and manage benefits in my name. Without it, none of it would have held up. I scanned the document, stored it under an encrypted drive, and sent an anonymous copy to Agent Morris with no note attached. Step 2 was exposure. I knew a journalist from school, Andrea, who now worked at a local paper covering public corruption. I reached out, casually. Told her I had a story about SSI abuse in small-town Pennsylvania. She was skeptical until I showed her part of the file. When she saw my father's signature and the company name, her voice changed. "Emily," she said, "this isn't just fraud. This is a whole operation. We started meeting quietly at night in her car behind the Sheetz gas station off the highway. I'd bring documents, she'd bring coffee and recorders. For weeks, we pieced together the puzzle. Fake clients, altered invoices, fake care reports, and a network of friends and relatives Trisha had roped into confirming my disability whenever an agency checked in. The picture that formed was darker than I ever expected. Trisha wasn't just stealing from the government. She was coaching others on how to do it. TRG Home Care was basically a front. She'd taught her sister and two of her friends how to open their own fake care companies using disabled dependents. My father wasn't a bystander. He was the respectable husband who vouched for them, signed off the books, and kept the illusion of a legitimate business alive. Andrea asked me once if I was scared. I told her I was past scared. I was angry, but anger wasn't enough. I wanted precision. Step 3 was setting the stage. I called my dad one night and pretended to break down. Told him I missed him, that I wanted to fix things, that I couldn't stand being the family pariah anymore. He took the bait instantly. Within a week, I was invited to Sunday dinner. My first time back home since the graduation party. The whole drive there, my hands shook. The house looked smaller, meaner somehow. Trisha opened the door, pretending warmth that couldn't hide the tension in her eyes. "Emmy," she said, fake smile tight. "You look healthy." I smiled back. "You too." Dinner was stiff. Awkward laughter, small talk. They were testing me, I could tell. I let them believe I was fragile, that I missed them, that I just wanted peace. Halfway through dessert, I excused myself to use the bathroom. Instead, I went to Dad's office, the one Trisha always kept locked. Except that night she hadn't. Inside, I found a safe under his desk, and next to it a ledger, handwritten, every payment, every client, every fake hour of care. I took photos of every page. When I walked back into the dining room, Trisha smiled at me again, that polished, poisonous smile. "Feels good to be home, doesn't it?" she said. I smiled back and said, "Yeah. Feels like closure." But she didn't know that was the night I lit the fuse. A week after that dinner, Andrea called me. Her voice was shaking. "Emily," she said, "we found something. You need to see this in person." We met again behind the sheets. She handed me a folder, thicker than usual, and said quietly, "You weren't the only one they used." I flipped it open and froze. Inside were medical forms, benefit records, and guardianship documents under a name I didn't recognize. Sarah J. Barnes, my father's niece. She'd been listed as mentally disabled, too, with my father as her payee. But Sarah wasn't disabled. She was alive, working at a diner 2 towns over. Andrea had tracked her down, and when she showed Sarah the records, Sarah had burst into tears. Sarah told her everything. When she was 19, my dad and Trisha had offered to help her fix her credit. They said they'd sign her up for a small financial aid program under her name, help her get medical coverage. She'd trusted them. What she didn't know was that they'd used her information to start another account with the same scam setup: fake disability, fake reports, fake hours. For 3 years, they'd collected money under her name, too. It wasn't just me. It wasn't even just the family. They'd created a whole web of stolen identities, anyone vulnerable, anyone who wouldn't notice or wouldn't fight back. Andrea's hands were trembling when she said, "They've been doing this for over a decade, Emily. Maybe longer." I felt my throat close up. 10 years. 10 years of lies while they hosted cookouts, Christmas parties, smiled at church. 10 years of pretending to be caregivers. And then Andrea said something that made my blood go cold. "There's one more name on the list. Teresa A. Barnes." My mother. They had used her name too. After she died, my father and Trisha had listed her as a household dependent for a full year, claiming posthumous medical care reimbursements. They'd stolen from her too. That broke something in me I didn't even know was left. The grief I'd buried for years came roaring back like it had just happened. My mom wasn't just gone, she'd been exploited after death. I told Andrea I needed a few days to think. But in truth, I already knew what I was going to do. I called Agent Morris and told him I had more proof. He met me at a diner on Route 6, where I handed him copies of the ledger, the guardianship papers, and the names Andrea had uncovered. I told him about Sarah, about the accounts, about my mother's name being used. He sat there speechless for a long moment, then said, "Emily, this changes everything. This isn't just fraud anymore. This is organized exploitation." The case expanded overnight. My father and Trisha's bail was revoked. Their accounts were frozen. The FBI raided TRG Home Care's office, seizing computers, ledgers, hard drives. It was all over the news within days, local couple accused in multi-state disability aid scheme. People in our town acted shocked, but I saw the truth in their faces, a few of them knew. Trisha had helped others file similar claims. It was a chain reaction of quiet greed, all collapsing at once. But here's the thing, when they arrested Trisha, she didn't cry, she didn't deny anything. She looked straight at the camera and smirked. And when they took my father away, he said one thing to the officers that I'll never forget. She said this would keep us safe. That one sentence haunted me. Safe from what? I didn't get the answer until the next month, when the investigators finally told me the horrifying truth about why they'd started this in the first place. The real reason came out in a briefing room, sterile walls, cold light, Agent Morris's voice quieter than usual. He slid a report across the table, said, "You deserve to know where this started." It wasn't about money at first. It was about covering up a crime. The first fraudulent application, the one filed right after my mom's death, had been submitted 3 days after she fell down the basement stairs. For years, I believed what my dad told me, that she slipped. But the autopsy report in that file didn't match what I'd been told. There were bruises on her wrists, a fractured rib, a head injury inconsistent with a single fall. And then Morris said the thing that made the room tilt. Trisha was already living with you at that time. I felt like I couldn't breathe. She'd moved in as a family friend just months before Mom died. I remembered the fights, the muffled yelling through walls, Mom crying in the bathroom, me turning up my music because I didn't want to hear it. I was 14 and scared, and I thought she was just sick again. But the report said something else. The police at the time had raised questions about the scene, the timing, the bruises, but my father insisted she'd been alone when it happened. He'd refused an in-depth investigation, citing mental distress. The case was closed as an accident. Except there was one problem. Trisha's fingerprints were found on the railing that had been broken in half. She'd told investigators she'd helped clean up afterward. No one pushed further. 2 weeks later, the first disability claim under my name was filed, with forged medical notes describing me as severely traumatized and mentally delayed due to domestic instability. They'd used my mother's death as the foundation of the scam. But it wasn't just about money. According to emails recovered from Trisha's old laptop, she'd been terrified the insurance company might open an inquiry into Mom's death benefits. The policy had a cause of death clause that could trigger a criminal review if foul play was suspected. Filing the disability claim under my name and portraying the family as unstable but struggling was her way of keeping the system sympathetic and distracted. And my father had gone along with it. In one email, dated 4 days after my mother's funeral, Trisha wrote, "Once we file the claim, they'll leave us alone. They'll see a damaged family, not a suspicious one. We just have to make the paperwork consistent." My father replied, "Do what you need to, just make sure she never asks questions." Me, they'd built their entire new life, marriage, house, business on a lie born from my mother's death. The fraud wasn't the disease, it was the cover-up. I sat in that cold room for a long time, shaking. I asked Morris if they were reopening my mom's case. He nodded. "We are now. The coroner's report was altered. It's being treated as a homicide." That night, I drove back to the old house. It was empty, foreclosed, windows boarded up. But I stood outside anyway, staring at the cracked front steps, the railing that had once given way. I could still hear my mom humming, smell her perfume. Everything I thought I knew about my childhood, my father's grief, his remarriage, his financial struggles, it was all rot built on her blood. That's when something inside me settled into a cold, clean kind of focus. I wasn't just getting revenge anymore. I was finishing a story my mom never got to tell. Because the next time my father saw my face, it wouldn't be at a courtroom or a visit. It would be on the front page of the paper, under the headline that stripped every ounce of innocence they'd ever claimed. The morning the article went live, the entire town froze. Andrea's story hit the Scranton Times front page under the headline, "Family Fraud Scheme Concealed Possible Homicide. Daughter's Testimony Reopens 2011 Death Case." My name was there. My mother's name. My father's mugshot, Trisha's smirk. Every detail laid out: the forged guardianship, the stolen benefits, the sham company, and the link between my mom's accident and the money trail that followed. It wasn't just a story, it was a reckoning. I woke up to a phone buzzing nonstop. Reporters, classmates, old neighbors, even people from college who had no idea what I'd gone through. But I didn't answer anyone. I just sat on my floor, cross-legged, reading the story over and over. When I finally looked up, sunlight was spilling across the window. For the first time in years, I felt something like peace, not happiness, not triumph, just quiet. By noon, my dad and Trisha were being transferred to federal custody. My grandmother collapsed at the courthouse. My aunt finally called me, not to yell, but to whisper, "We didn't know, Emily. We didn't want to know." The community turned fast. People who'd called me ungrateful suddenly posted prayers for Emily online. I ignored all of it. They hadn't cared when it mattered. But Uncle Ray, he showed up at my apartment that evening, same quiet man as always. He didn't say much, just handed me a small envelope. Inside was my mom's old locket. "She gave this to me a week before she died," he said. "Told me to hold on to it for you, said she didn't trust what was happening in that house anymore." Inside the locket was a tiny folded piece of paper. My mom's handwriting, shaky but clear. "If anything ever happens to me, take care of her. She's stronger than she knows." I broke right there. Cried harder than I had since I was 14. That night, I met Andrea one last time. We sat in her car, the same spot where everything started. She asked if I wanted to comment for the follow-up story. I said no. "The truth's enough," I told her. "They can drown in their own words now." A few months later, the verdict came down. Both of them were sentenced. My dad got 12 years for fraud and conspiracy. Trisha got 18 for fraud, identity theft, and obstruction of justice. The homicide investigation into my mom's death was officially reopened, pending further evidence. I went to the sentencing but didn't sit in the main row. I stood in the back, where they couldn't see me easily. When they walked in wearing orange, shackled, heads down, I didn't feel victory, just finality. Trisha looked at me once, her face hard and hollow. I met her eyes without blinking. And then my dad looked up, and for the first time, I saw something I hadn't expected: not guilt, not sadness, but fear. The kind that comes from realizing the truth has outlived your lies. When the judge read the sentence, I didn't clap or cry. I just turned and walked out before they even finished. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. I stood on the courthouse steps, opened my mom's locket, and let the chain rest against my palm. I'd lost every part of the family I grew up with. But I'd gained something cleaner, something they couldn't forge, couldn't steal, couldn't twist: freedom. And as I looked up at the gray Scranton sky, I said quietly, almost to myself, "Guess I made it despite her."